Okay, so we're in the shop, we're back from the range, and there's a number of things about these Hall rifles and carbines that I wanted to bring up in our first post about them, but trying to keep the post manageable and get all the information was so hard to do. So we're going to go over just a couple of extra little details that I didn't get in our shooting post. First thing is, when we were shooting our Model 43 earlier today, this is the one you saw on the range being fired. What I didn't tell you is that we were shooting it at 50-yard range offhand. This is one of our targets. You can see it's not too bad. Again, it's 50 yards offhand using our, actually in this one I was using 38 grains of powder with the 525 diameter bullet. So that's not too bad, which will tell you with practice someone can become pretty proficient with shooting with these guns. Another thing that needs to be brought up in addressing using Hall weapons in modern times is that because of the amount of leakage that these things get, they get really gunked up inside. Everywhere from the back of the stock all the way up the barrel channel gets loaded with soot from shooting, powder residue. So these guns have to be completely disassembled to clean them. I'm not going to do that right now, but I want to show you, should you have to, or even inspecting one of these at a gun show, how to quickly check them over to see how good they are. The screw that keeps the entire assembly in line is the very front screw here. So on any Hall, be it a carbine or a rifle, to clean it or start cleaning it or inspect it, screw comes out. There we go. Then simply opening the receiver, pulling the receiver out of the mortise, you can right away see just how messy these things get inside from shooting. And this is why it's important to totally disassemble the gun to clean it. There's no way you can get all of the powder residue out from under the barrel channel, from under the supporters, to do that. And again too, you can see just how sooted up the mechanism itself gets. This you don't have to take apart necessarily. This can be submerged in a little pail of hot water, just soap and hot water and a brush. Clean it, dry it thoroughly. I clean it with a brush. A bore brush in the chamber, dry it off real good, let it dry and oil it. After about every 6 months of use, I will completely disassemble them. But in that time period, I'll just do what I described, just cleaning with hot water. And again, I'm not going to take the whole gun apart, but you can see, and I believe part of what we're seeing here is part of the reason that the soldiers dislike these guns so much. Not that they were bad guns, but they are high maintenance in that they need to have this extensive cleaning to keep them in good service. And of course, you can see our breech section. On Halls, the face of the breech is curved to match the face of the receiver. Those surfaces, if you're going to shoot one of these, need to be in good, smooth working order. All right. Another thing about Halls, as long as we've got it apart, they do have the ability to adjust the trigger pull, the tension to fire the gun via this little screw. It's not a set trigger, but it drops it so that the sear engages less and less in the full cock notch. It'll give you about a 2-pound trigger pull. So that little screw will do that. And all Hall weapons have that, the rifles and the carbines. And again, you can see just how messy these things can get. Another thing I wanted to bring up, in loading these guns, I mentioned that they should never be loaded with the full service charge anymore. The stocks are too fragile to take that. You don't want to damage the gun or have other problems. What I did at first when I started shooting these guns was to charge them with that powder charge that I recommended, that 35 to 45 grain, somewhere in between those 2 points. Each gun's a little different. At first when I did this, I found that, here, let's get another Hall receiver here. I found that to get the powder in such a way, the powder stops about here at that charge. and the ball needs to rest up here. So I found that if I put in 24 gauge shotgun wads, I could get a spacing combination that would allow the light powder charge and the ball to rest on top here. And while that worked, it was kind of a pain to do. So what I came up with, and again, this isn't cleaned yet, but you'll get the idea. What I came up with was to make a reducer sleeve. And this sleeve is machined on the lathe, and it's hand fit to each receiver. I've done a couple of them. The reducer sleeve allows you to put in that low powder charge and yet have the volume of powder come all the way up to the top here, so you just drop the ball on top of it. You don't have to use spacers, you don't have to use measures, and it makes these guns really easy to use by doing that. You simply, as you saw in our previous post, put in a charge of powder, put the ball in it, close it, and fire it. So at a later time, we may do a post where we actually machine one of these sleeves and install it in a receiver. We'll save that for maybe a winter project. But when you saw me firing this today, that's why it was so easy to work with. I didn't have to measure the powder out in such a way that I put in sleeves and discs, or spacers, I'm sorry. I was able simply to charge it, put a ball in it, and fire it the way they were intended to, but with a lighter powder charge. So I wanted to explain that. Now, the other thing I was going to mention too, as I did on the range briefly, there are 3 really excellent books on the Hall system, and these are them. The most advanced and most detailed of the series is the one by Pete Schmidt here, Hall Military Breech Loaders. It is the most advanced, detailed. Everything you want to know about these guns pretty much is in this particular book. I don't think it's in print anymore, but you may be able to find one. The earlier version by R.T. Huntington is equally as well done. It does cover a few things that Pete did not put in the book. Again, they're out of print, but I'm sure one can be located on the internet. And the third book, which probably is very few people have heard of, is this one, Harper's Ferry Armory and the New Technology by Merritt Rowe Smith. This book devotes about a chapter and a half strictly to Hall, but also deals with Hall's influence on the Armory in respect to the machining and interchangeability of parts, which is what the U.S. government was more interested in from Hall than the actual breech-loading guns. So all 3 of these books would be excellent reads. They will fill in a lot of the gaps that I simply can't put in a post. So again, I hope this explains a little bit more about these guns, and in the future we may fire up the rifle too. This also gets a lot of shooting use. It handles the same as a carbine. It's just capable of longer ranges with more accuracy. And again, this is a Civil War vintage Hall. This is one of the ones that was altered by Eastman for anticipation of the Civil War, altered from flintlock to percussion. And we'll try to do a post on machining one of these bushings so you can see how they work. Like I said, by doing this, it makes these guns really easy to work with. They're kind of neat to shoot. They're messy, but they are a piece of history, and you can learn a lot about the way that the people who fought these wars had to handle these weapons by actually using them. So again, I hope this helps fill in some of the gaps from our earlier post, and thank you for taking a look at what we're doing here.